Well, welcome aboard, everybody, to Leadership Communication in the Virtual World, Executive Presence, and Your Professional Brand. We are really excited to have you here today. We've got people logged in from all over the world, so whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening, thanks for joining us today. We do appreciate it. And if you haven't heard me say it already, we would ask that you turn your cameras on, because using our cameras is one of the few new tools we have as in our leadership toolkit, so we might as well learn to do it well. That said, there are legitimate reasons for not having your camera on, so if you don't want to, that's totally fine with us. So my name is Greg Owen-Boger. I am the Vice President of Turpin Communication, and we've got Dale Ludwig, our President and Founder, with us today.
Morning, afternoon, everybody.
And we also have Kevin Vogelsang with us today. He is our operations manager, and he's going to be performing the role of host. And I might also note that he has by default muted you, but that is not an indication that we don't want you to talk. So feel free to take yourself off mute if you have something to add to the conversation or a question that you would like answered in real time. You can also put questions or comments in chat. We will be monitoring those as well. So let's go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know who Turpin Communication is, we are a communication consulting firm. We're based in Chicago, Illinois, in the United States, and we work with people at all levels of organizations across the globe. Today, we're going to be talking about our work with leaders and emerging leaders, and that's why you are here, because you're either already a leader or you are an aspiring leader. Now, Dale and I have been doing this for a really long time. He founded the company 29 years ago, and I came around about 26 years ago. And when you do one thing for a really long time, consultants tend to write books, and we're no different. So we've got a few books here lined up. The Orderly Conversation, which Dale will get at a little bit, talks about our work with presentation skills training. We've got another book on the right-hand side of the screen called Effective SMEs. That's about our work with trainers. And then, of course, meeting and facilitation. When the pandemic hit, we finally took the opportunity to write a companion piece to the Orderly Conversation. It's called The Virtual Orderly Conversation, and you're actually going to get a link to a free download at when we're done with today's webinar. This image right here shows, to me, a metaphor of what was going on in 2020, March, Friday the 13th. If you remember, Friday the 13th in March 2020 was a bad day. We had basically seen the dominoes falling all around us. And those of us who are leaders had to step in and say, let's stop the dominoes falling, and let's look around and figure out what is our path forward. And we did that, and we stumbled through a lot of stuff. But what's happening right now is some organizations are starting to go back into the office. And of course, that is creating another wave of unknowns. And now we've got the Delta variant that is also presenting more unknowns. So if you are feeling like the dominoes still aren't quite set back up, you're in good company. I don't feel like those dominoes are set back up yet either. But anyway, this image shows what happened then and what we're going through right now. So with that as a foundation, I just want to ask the group, what brings you here today? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll go to gallery view so that we can see one another. Although Prasad, all I can see is the top of your head. There's your eyes peeking out. There we go. So all of you, feel free to take yourself off mute and just share what brings you here today. Well, Kristen, since you and I were chatting a little bit earlier, what brings you here today?
Well, I went to one of your other trainings. I was just trying to remember what the name of that class was, so I could share that, but I didn't look it up fast enough. So,
I thought you looked familiar.
Yes, yeah, I enjoyed that. And well, let's see, why am I here? I liked the name of the course, Leadership Communication in a Virtual World. I supervise a group of analysts, and we work remotely, and that's been a big change for me. And so anytime that I'm able to learn some communication skills in the remote world, I'm ready to learn that. So that's why.
Great. Well, we're happy to have you again. And the name of that webinar was probably called Virtual Meetings That Work. We have a second webinar that we're actually going to do tomorrow. Although we've sort of switched it around the last couple of months, we've called it Virtual Meetings that Work for Everyone. And we're taking a spin through diversity, equity, and inclusion as it pertains to virtual communication. So we'll be doing that tomorrow. We'll give you a little more information, everybody, about that webinar. I will still open it up to other people. What brings you here today?
Hello and good morning, Greg. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. My name is Quisha. I'm sorry, I was actually eating when you asked that question. So I provide virtual education, continuing education, and certification for community health workers and other public health professionals.
Yeah.
I've really fallen in love with the virtual environment, the virtual classroom, and all things educational technology. And so always looking for opportunities to further develop my facilitation skills. And again, like Kristen, I like the title and I'm interested in learning more about your organization and how I can improve my training skills as well.
Great. Well, welcome aboard. We work with a lot of trainers. So, yeah. Anybody else care to share why they've joined us today? Okay, well, we will leave it there. Oh, Ben, I see you were just about to speak. Thank you for rescuing me.
Sure. Yeah, so I guess I started my current position remotely, and I think I wrote this in the on the registration page, but I think because I started remotely, I feel a bit of pressure to show different sides of myself to my colleagues in a virtual setting. And I think it can be a little difficult to discern, when I should be wearing more of my professional hat and when I should be wearing more of my social sort of culture building hat. And not to say that the two are mutually exclusive, but I think I'm just looking for language strategies to think about, like personal success strategies, communication strategies in general. Don't know what I don't know, so I think it's a little hard for me to articulate my goals precisely, but that is the context that I am in. And I see leadership more of, for my personal goals, less of a position-based. It's less of a, like, I'm not aspiring to, like get a promotion. I literally just started. It's more so just leading within my role. And I am asked to, facilitate meetings. I work with a lot of coalitions and people with a lot of different personalities, a lot of different backgrounds, and also different kinds of power. I think it's both within the organization and outside of it. And I think that can be all a little confusing and overwhelming, and words matter, words piss people off. So I'm just interested in being a little more careful and intentional with my language.
I'm so glad you just used the word intentional, because we're actually going to be talking about being intentional as a leader, intentional with your communication, because the same sort of gut instinct that we used to be able to rely on face to face it's just different in the virtual space. So I'm going to stop talking there. Dale will talk more about that as we progress. So thanks everybody for sharing what brings you here today. By the way, if you want to use the chat, you're more than welcome to drop thoughts into chat as well. So we're going to bring together three big ideas today. The first being business communication, the second being professional branding, and the third being executive presence. And those three things are all interconnected, and we're just going to label it leadership communication. We've already mentioned cameras on if you can for the housekeeping here. Try to eliminate distractions. Try to be in this meeting with us today, because that is an important leadership skill, being present for the people that you work with. Ask questions as they bubble up. We want this to feel like a dialogue. And then also, Kevin is taking care of us in terms of Zoom bombing. We have had, believe it or not, a few really, really challenging Zoom bombing situations. So Kevin's going to take care of us and keep us safe here for the next hour and 15 minutes. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk through guiding principles of leadership communication. Then we'll take a dive into executive presence. What is it and what does it mean for me? Then we'll introduce you to some leadership communication tools and techniques, and we'll round things out with professional branding in the virtual world. So, guiding principles of leadership communication. Dale, let's switch things over and let you chat for a while.
I'm going to talk about, as Greg already said, some pretty fundamental ideas here, and this is going to connect nicely. Thank you, Ben, for the setup. That was a great way to set me up for what I'm going to be talking about here. But when we take a step back and think about what we need to worry about with communication, what are the communication considerations we all need to make, no matter what type of leader we might be. If you look down this list, we can see you need to think about what people need to hear from you. You need to think about what the situation requires, and then you need to think about what the organization needs. Now, these things all just jumped out in high relief during the pandemic, of course, but they still exist and will continue to exist in terms of what a leader needs to be concerned about. So people need greater urgency, frequency, and clarity right now. Now that means, as Greg already said, pandemic time, post-pandemic time, and as we move into sort of more hybrid meetings, which I believe we're all going to be in going forward, at least for a certain amount of time, maybe forever. If we're going to continue to work partially remotely, we're going to be in a hybrid environment using this type of interaction as well as face-to-face interactions. And so the world of communication gets even more complicated and uncomfortable sometimes for different reasons than we've ever faced before. So let's say that you sit down at your laptop and you start Googling things that are related to leadership communication. So you might Google leadership. That might lead you to emotional intelligence, executive presence might come in there, professional branding might come in there. And then, of course, I think the biggest bucket of these callouts is the soft skills, because soft skills are an enormously important set of skills that get talked about a lot, just on a real fundamental level, like, can you develop them? Aren't you just born with them? And those are the sorts of questions that we're still trying to figure out, although I think you can certainly develop them, but you are, in many cases, sort of born with these skills or learn them very early in life. We'll get more to that later. But what we want to do today is take the first step toward answering this question. How do you cut through all of this and make it meaningful for you? Because not only is leadership communication, executive presence, a complex thing, but it's also incredibly individual. So you have to work on an individual level to figure out what you need to do. There are no right or wrong answers along the way. You've got to get to know yourself a bit and figure out a good strategy. So this is our tagline, Business Communication Untangled. And we're using it here because many times when it comes to improving your communication, especially your leadership communication, the first step is to unlearn some of the things that you may have been taught. The first step is to kind of go through all of the feedback you've gotten and all the assumptions you've made and figure out, well, which of these is relevant to me and which of them can I let go? And I think that untangling process is central to the work that we do here at Turpin, and is going to be central to the work we're going to do today in this webinar. So if we look at how skills are developed, again, fundamental stuff, the skill development process involves these three steps. You need to be aware, awareness, starting on the left. What are the skills involved? Why are they important? What function do they serve? Then there's the personal assessment of how you use those skills. And then finally, there's the development of the skills. So the question is for you, what's needed and why? And that is a difficult question to answer. And it is never answered in a linear sort of way, the way this arrow indicates, because you're always learning more about new skills. You're always assessing how you're doing, and you're always developing and trying new things, and then maybe starting again with awareness and assessment. So the thing to think about, a couple of things. One, this requires a high level of self-awareness, and two, development requires breaking habits. And that seems really simple and obvious, but it's sometimes really painful to break habit. And I'm not talking about painful like, I have a headache, but it's just, it requires that you do things differently and for a particular effect that you are in control of. It's not accidental. It's not just, well, we'll see what happens. It's got to be a thoughtful use of skills and techniques. So as I said, self-awareness is absolutely crucial when it comes to this. You got to know yourself. And that's what the leadership development stuff that we're talking about later on is going to be all about. First, before we get there, let's talk about just the types of communication we all deal with. This is a continuum, as you can see here, going from conversations up to speeches. All of these are face-to-face communication that occur in the workplace. Now, on the right-hand side with the speeches, this is probably the least frequent of all of these, right? Because who gives a speech? Well, the CEO gives a speech to the whole team, maybe, or maybe at a conference, a speech is delivered. But that's a sort of one-way, very controlled type of communication. On the other end of the continuum, the conversation, it's the opposite of a speech in so many ways, because it usually is not planned. It usually involves a lot of give and take between people. And many times it's not delivered or that doesn't take place for a particular purpose. It's just a way of sharing information, getting to know each other, which is sort of what Ben was talking about earlier. How do you get that part going when you're working virtually? In the middle are the two types of communication that we focus on here at Turpin, because it's about meetings and about presentations. They share characteristics with both the conversation and with the speech. So it's that overlap, it's that managing of a process rather than delivering a product, that where our sweet spot is. That's where we really focus. So what that means is with both meetings and presentations is that we need to come up with a new way of talking about them. We have decided on the term orderly conversation, because it helps us get at the fundamental tension involved with both of them. So if you're involved in an orderly conversation, as you can see on the left here, there needs to be some order. So that means you got to prepare, you got to think about accuracy, and you got to think about structure. How are you going to organize the material that you are delivering so that people can easily understand it? On the other side, we have the conversation, which is where all the interaction takes place. So that requires engagement on your part. It requires spontaneity. It requires interactivity. So these two things, of course, we're using the arrow there to indicate the fact that these two things sometimes don't play well together, because you're constantly trying to balance both. And Ben, you articulated it very well when you said, well, where's the social part, the personal part? How does that come into it? But then how do you also get business done? So you've got to use, the way we talk about it is, you've got to use the conversation to achieve your goal. That doesn't mean your goal is a weak one or your structure is shabby. No, it's got to be there, but you use the conversation to use the structure to guide the conversation, and use the conversation to reach your goal. So what that means in practical terms is that, as you can see, we've added the word planning and presenting inside those circles. On the planning side, whenever you are planning for a meeting or planning for a presentation, you're looking ahead to the uncertainties of the conversation. You're anticipating what might happen, who's in the room, what their attitude might be, how you might respond to things people say. And of course, that's part of that is also accepting the fact that to make your listeners or your meeting participants' job easy, you've got to have a clear structure for them to follow. And that's another part of a challenge for the orderly part. Then on the conversation part, when you're presenting or when you're facilitating, you're always adapting to what's happening in the moment. So that means the way you structure a presentation is not the same way you structure a speech, because a speech, sometimes they're scripted and read, or teleprompters are used. With the presentation, you can't do that, because it destroys the conversation that needs to happen. So what you need to do is create a framework that works, that will give you the leeway you need to have a conversation, but also give you the structure you need to get things done. So orderly conversation is central to the work that we do. And what it means is that both meetings and presentations succeed on two different levels. First level is the plan, the second level is the process itself. So as you can see on the planning side, you want to achieve the goal. And these are things these are the business goals. Buy, agree, align, learn, whatever it happens to be, you want your group to reach that goal by the time you're finished. Now, in order to do that, you've got to manage the conversation that's taking place. That means, a little more specifically, create the conditions for a fruitful discussion. Don't do anything to stop the conversation. When you do that, you earn trust and goodwill. You're making it easy for people. You're managing the give and take that is a necessary part of the meeting, and you're nurturing relationships. So again, going back to Ben, earning trust, nurturing relationships are very difficult to do when you're working virtually, but it's also very difficult to do sometimes when you're face to face, because you've got to let that process happen. You got to build the trust that you need as a leader of a meeting. or just a presenter, you've got to assure people that you are not going to waste their time. You're going to get things done. You're going to have your professional hat on, but at the same time, you're not going to be so strict that the conversation doesn't happen, because you've got to have that as well. Last thing I want to talk about here is you want to find your focus, be yourself, only better. This is our old tagline. And the reason we had it as a tagline is it describes the fact that in the middle here, your primary goal is to be yourself. That means as a leader, as a presenter, as a facilitator, you want to be who you are and not try to take on somebody else's characteristics. But it also means at a really practical level that being yourself means your head is together. You're not in the moment of when you kick off the meeting or start the presentation. You are not worried about anything but initiating a conversation with that group of people. And that takes effort, and that takes a specific use of skills that we'll be talking about in a bit. So that leads us to find your focus. What is important for you? Where should your attention go? How do you, this goes back to the idea I was talking about, that you're going to develop differently than other folks, because the skills you focus on to get your head together, to get things moving, are going to be different for you than they are for somebody else. Then finally, the only better part, once we all know how challenging meetings and presentations can be, because unexpected things happen, you've got to respond in the moment, on the fly, to things that might come up that you totally were unprepared for. You can do that once your head is in the right space and you are engaged and really focused. So your goal is to always know what to worry about, get your head together. That'll help you manage the process. Emotional intelligence. Greg, do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to take it?
Sure, I can take it at this point. So
Okay.
if a lot of what Dale was talking about earlier sounds like emotional intelligence, it is actually. And so for those of you who are starting your career or starting to manage other people, starting with emotional intelligence is a really smart place to start. There are 4 abilities, as you can see on the screen: the self-awareness and self-management. So that's about how are you doing with yourself. And then on the right-hand side of that grid, social awareness, and then relationship management. And Dale talked about relationship management being one of those second levels of success in a meeting. So Dale, I'm going to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine and move forward here. There we go. So let's talk about relationship management, because I can probably guarantee that all of our relationships have taken on a different flavor that now that we've been virtual for so long, and managing those relationships is actually going to be different as we move into a hybrid workspace. So let's take a look at relationship management in traditional meetings. This is what a traditional meeting used to look like. It's one thing to manage relationships when you can see people, you can read their body language, you can notice that they're about to speak because you see something happening on their face, and you make space for them to be able to do that. We know how to do that. We're social beings, right? But then virtually it got harder, because reading facial expressions and body language was more difficult, and you've got the muting and unmuting of lines. And so you've also got the, like, going back to you, Ben, again, how much of that social chit chat should you do before we get down to business? That became something that we had to deal with. Well, relationship management in hybrid meetings, I'm here to say, is going to get even more challenging. So let me explain why we say that. It's all about the situation that you will find yourself in. So as you can see in the image here, the videos can pull people's focus. So even though these 4 individuals are sitting in the room together, all of the gravity has been pulled to the screen. Now, not only can video pull focus, but so can decision makers. So let's take a look at this particular situation. Let's say that the guy on the left is the decision maker in this particular meeting. It looks like the woman on the right is probably doing the speaking at this particular moment in time. But we have to wonder about the person who is logging in virtually. Are they being ignored? That is going to become something that we need to be hyper vigilant about as we move forward, because you do not want to ruin relationships by ignoring unintentionally ignoring someone who is dialing in remotely into your meeting. Now let's take a look at this particular situation. Let's say that the woman who is dialing in up here on the screen, let's say she is the decision maker, and let's say our guy over here is the speaker. The video is pulling focus of the room, and we have to wonder if these other two individuals in the room are being ignored. Now, they may not be. They may be fully in the conversation, but you have to be intentional about how you are inclusive with everybody. Now, if you think back to the good old days when maybe you were sitting around a conference room table with several other people, and other people had dialed into just a basic conference call, when someone who was on the phone was talking, you're probably looking at the phone that was in the middle of the table, right? It's the same sort of thing. The dynamics are really, really weird. And we have to be intentional about it. So with that, let's move on now to executive presence. What is it and what does it mean for me? So let me ask this question here. How would you like to be described by the people you work with and for?
Yes.
Now, I have answered this question, and Kevin is going to drop into chat the attributes that I want you to describe me as. We'll give him a moment to do that. There it is. How I'd like to be perceived is genuine, honest, likable, articulate, trustworthy, someone people want to work with, approachable, and a problem solver. Now, for you, drop some answers into chat. How do you want to be described? Ben says dependable, mature, trustworthy, approachable. Federico follows up with clear, concise, honest, a problem solver. Kristen says knowledgeable, trustworthy. Sam says approachable, thoughtful, welcoming. Oh, that's a very important one, being a welcoming leader. William, actually, I don't think your name is William, but it's showing up as William. Works with integrity, genuine, open to new ideas, able to build bridges. Ooh, yeah. Frank says credible, helpful, proactive. By the way, for those of you who are dialing in, maybe on somebody else's computer, or maybe just showing a name from the previous person who dialed in, you can roll your mouse over the name and then right click and you can change your name. Gosh, Quisha says inspiring, a good listener, authentic. You're welcome, William, soon to be renamed something else. Okay, so you have started now to think about your brand, and we're going to talk about brand a little bit later, but this list of attributes, start thinking about how does my communication, especially in the virtual space, help me meet those goals, and am I doing anything that is getting in the way or might harm my goals? Tanya, there you are. Very good. So now let me ask you this to the entire group. How would you define executive presence? You can take yourself off mute and talk, or you can drop it into chat. Either way is fine. How would you define executive presence? By the way, when I look over here, I'm just looking at your videos because I've moved all of your videos over to my second monitor. I'm not, oh, there we go. We've got a couple of responses. Tanya says, clear decision maker, a visionary. Priscilla adds, someone who can control emotions. Frank says, looking and sounding like a leader or someone in power. Looking and sounding like a leader. That's so elusive though, isn't it? But I agree with what you say. It's sort of like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall, defining executive presence. Kristen adds inspiring. I would say that everything that you've added there is absolutely true, and yet it still is elusive. So we need a good definition. And over the years, our clients have asked us, can you help with someone's moving into the C-suite. He's a little rough around the edges. Can you work with him on his executive presence? Or we've got some aspiring leaders and we want to start to build their executive presence. Can you do that? And we were always a little bit leery to say yes, because if we can't actually define what is executive presence, it's very difficult to coach somebody on it. So I went on a journey to learn everything I could about executive presence. And I read a lot of crap books. I'm going to be very honest with you. They were all written by old white guys talking about how they developed their executive presence. Not helpful. Look around the world that we live in right now, right? So I finally found a book that was written by a woman. And that is the first thing that intrigued me. But as I dug into it, I realized, yes, we finally have a working definition. So All the Leader You Can Be, The Science of Achieving Extraordinary Executive Presence, written by Suzanne Bates and her partners at Bates Communications. So Suzanne goes on to say, to define executive presence as the qualities of a leader that engage, inspire, align, and move people to act. And she goes on to say, By understanding how your intentions as a leader match up with others' perceptions, you can learn to flex your style to gain trust, build alignment, and lead change. So executive presence is based on how you are being perceived by others, and building your self-awareness that Dale talked about earlier. Those perceptions can be changed and improved. So now we have a working definition that we can actually work with. Now, she goes on, I should say, I should answer the question that you probably have right now is, why are you talking about somebody else's book? And that is a very legitimate question to be asking. We are certified to teach the Bates material because I was so intrigued by her work that we contacted the organization and said, can you certify us? And they said, absolutely. So hence why we're here today. But anyway, Suzanne goes on to identify 15 facets that are within 3 dimensions. So the dimensions are character, substance, style, and then these 5 facets or leadership attributes that through their research across the globe at leaders with all layers within their organizations, these are the 15 facets or attributes that are common among people who are considered to be effective leaders. And every single one of these things shows up in a meeting. So that's how we can connect the dots with leadership communication and executive presence. Now, one of the things we should talk about is, why are these things called facets? Well, I think this is actually a brilliant piece of Suzanne's work. So if we look at this image here, each one of these gems shows up differently depending on how it's carved and how it's polished and the light that it's in. Every single one of you is a gem. Your facets show up in different ways depending on the situation that you're in. And that's why we each have our own unique brand of executive presence, if you will. And then, if you think about how you might shine a gem, we too can learn to shine certain facets of ourselves to lean into our strengths or to polish up a weakness that we might have. Now, we're going to dig into this fairly deeply over the next hour or so. Yeah, almost an hour. And there is a handout that we are going to send you after today's webinar. So if you're a note taker, I'm going to let you off the hook from having to take too many notes right now, because everything that we're going to talk about is in this handout that you will have access to. So Dale, I'm going to turn things over to you to dig in.
Okay, you're seeing my screen?
We are.
Great. You've seen this slide before. I wanted to bring it up again because I want to talk about how the information I'm about to go into relates to each part of this, what people need to hear, what the situation requires, and what the organization needs. So let's dive into the Bates material. I'm going to focus on just 6 of these facets. And as you'll see going through, and you probably can already tell, there's a lot of overlap here among all of these. And as you get to know yourself, when your executive presence is assessed using the Bates 360, you find out where your strengths and weaknesses, challenging things might lie on this chart. So under character, I'm going to talk about authenticity and concern, substance, resonance, and vision, and then finally in style, intentionality, and inclusiveness. So the first one, character. Just to mention, I mentioned earlier, are you sort of born with soft skills? Character are the facets that you learned growing up. They're formed early in life, and they still continue to show up in your work life. But authenticity, integrity, concern, restraint, and humility. I'm going to focus on authenticity and concern. So authenticity, let's start there. Everybody knows basically what authenticity is, but it's about being real, genuine, transparent, and sincere in your relations and interactions with others. Now, that doesn't mean in another one of our webinars, we had a chat with a participant afterwards. And she said, there are times when I don't want people to know everything about me. So am I not being authentic? And my response was, no, you're being perfectly authentic. I think authenticity doesn't mean that you bare your soul. It means that you are honest in your interactions with folks, which of course leads to people being able to trust you and believe in you. Specifically, what it looks like in a meeting is you're communicating unambiguously, telling personal stories to reveal who you are, not everything about who you are, but you're telling stories so that people get to know you outside of the work environment, communicating how you really feel, expressing empathy and vulnerability, admitting you don't know the answer. Obviously, this connects to humility at the bottom of the list, when you don't have to always be right, when you can trust other people to make the point and see that as a good thing. So all of these things come together to make you appear authentic, somebody that someone else wants to work with. And so you might be wondering, well, doesn't that always happen? Aren't I always being authentic? And sometimes, even if you look at the top bullet here, communicating unambiguously, you may not know that you're being a little bit ambiguous. You may not know that you're not being as clear as you could be. And so it's good to have the feedback of other people saying, you know what, I really wasn't sure what you were doing there. Then you can adjust and help improve the situation when it comes to your authenticity. So let's go on to concern. Demonstrating interest in others and promoting a healthy, sustainable culture. So again, Ben, going back to you, you mentioned building the culture at the organization that you work in. And I think that while authenticity is about how you personally are coming across, concern is about how you are coming across, how your attitude toward other people is coming across, your focus and interest in other people. So creating the conditions for fruitful discussion, that's a Turpin term, and it's part of communicating concern. Listening well, asking what others think, speaking sincerely and with positive intent, nurturing relationships through effective communication. So all of this takes the fundamentals of authenticity and sort of turns it toward the other people that you're working with. Are you direct? Are you honest? Are you genuinely interested in them? Are you really listening to what they have to say? And when you ask what other people think, do you really seem to care that you do? One thing you'll notice about this set of 15 facets is that empathy is not one of them. And when we were working with the Bakes folks, learning about their processes, we asked about that. And they said, oh, empathy is everywhere in the 15 facets. It's not, you can't really pull it out and make it its own distinct facet because it influences so many other things. And part of that, part of being a person demonstrating concern is that you are demonstrating empathy for others. Okay, let's look at substance. Substance, rather than something being a list of things that you've learned early in life, these are all things that you sort of learned on the job. This is business acumen might fall into this category, but as you can see, practical wisdom, confidence, composure, resonance, vision. All of these things fall into the substance category. So the two I want to talk about are resonance and vision. And somebody mentioned vision on the list of characteristics of executive presence. So that's certainly a part of the Bates work. With resonance, as you can see, connecting with others, being attentive, attuned, responsive to feelings, motivations, thoughts, deepening alignment. So this, again, like concern, is all about how well you are able to communicate interest in and help other people feel that you are interested in them. So what does it look like? Again, listening well and expressing empathy. We talked about that already. Creating an open environment, inviting dialogue. Making information relevant to others and the business. Using language that doesn't intimidate or make others feel bad. So I think this is getting a little bit more specific than the concern one, in that it's about what you're saying, how that's being received, sometimes in very, very subtle ways. Because if you think about, let's see, well, my eyes are not landing where I wanted to land. Oh, the last one, using language that doesn't intimidate or make others feel bad. Sometimes we're not aware of that. And again, making yourself aware of it, trying to change that habit a bit is part of the resonance journey, if you will, if I can use that sort of jargony expression. Vision. Generating an inspiring enterprise-wide picture of what could be, recognizing emerging trends and engaging in strategy. This is all about, are you the kind of person, are you the kind of leader that can see the future and communicate it to the people that you're working with? And we're going to talk about vision a little bit later on when we talk about Greg's and my 360s, because vision was one of my low-ranked characteristics. But let me define it a little more carefully. This one is about storytelling to paint a picture of what could be. It's about taking the time to describe in detail or vividly through some metaphor or whatever through your story to talk about what the future looks like for the organization. Being thorough without going into too much detail. communicating the what and the why, being optimistic, inspiring others. That middle one, communicating the what and the why, is something that I know I hope I've learned. I hope I've learned to do this, because what it means is, if you're making a decision that's going to have, it's going to be hard for people to take. And the example I've been using since the pandemic hit is, a friend of mine worked for an organization when early in the pandemic, leadership said, okay, everybody, we are all going to take a 20% pay cut, temporary 20% pay cut, and work 4 days a week. And so that's the what, and that is tough to hear. But the why was so that we will have no layoffs. So I could take a 20% cut in pay a whole lot better, knowing that I'm saving everybody's jobs and everybody is saving my job. Makes that a lot more palatable. So taking the time to do that, and when we're working with subject matter experts to be trainers, it's always about, okay, you've just given them the detail of this process. Now talk about why it's important, or talk about why it evolved within the organization. In other words, open up enough to show how you think about this, because that will help people understand it. And I think that opening up and taking the time to do that is a challenging part of the what and the why part of the vision.
Dale,
Okay,
can I interrupt you for just a
yeah.
second? I have a story I'd like to share with everybody. If you could go up to the previous slide, thanks. So vision has storytelling to paint a picture of what could be. That's easy to get your head around. Authenticity, that Dale talked about earlier, also includes storytelling, but authenticity is about revealing who you are. So I was working with a gentleman recently who is leading a very fast growing company. He happens to be based in Ukraine. He was born in Ukraine. And the challenge that he's facing right now is that he is absolutely laser focused on creating a diverse work environment that is global, but also keeping this train on the track while it's growing during the middle of a global pandemic. It's a real challenge. And we were working on a video. And so we started with a story of his childhood to reveal some authenticity. As it happens, he was born at the same time the Chernobyl disaster happened in Ukraine under the Soviet Union. And he talked about how depressing and literally and figuratively gray the world was. There was no diversity. There was no interesting thinking that was taking place. And he recognized at a very early age that he wanted something very different for himself. So he created this company from scratch. And now he has to tell additional stories to paint the picture of what the future looks like while he keeps this train on the tracks. So storytelling can be a really, really compelling tool in your leadership toolbox. Dale, I'll turn things back over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Good example. Okay, the final dimension here is style. Now, this might look like this, oh, this must be superficial. It's really not, because it involves appearance, intentionality, inclusiveness, interactivity, and assertiveness. So these facets are the most observable of all of the facets in the Bates model, because this is how you work with people day to day. This is how you look, how you sound, how you manage things. And I'm going to talk about two of these, intentionality and inclusiveness. I do want to talk a little bit about appearance. Don't assume that appearance means, oh, just means, wow, dressed well, looks good. That's more than it goes into more detail there. What she's talking about is, do you look like you were ready for the job? And that was a big deal during the pandemic. Early in the pandemic, if you remember, you probably were working with people that weren't very thoughtful about just what they chose to wear, since they're sitting in their living room in front of the computer. I mean, that came up a lot with our clients, that you need to think about how it's being perceived. It's not just about being good looking. In fact, it's not that at all. It's about whether or not you look ready to go. So, intentionality. Clarifying the direction and keeping actions aligned and on track, all without stifling dissent or neglecting the needs to adjust course. So this is about having a plan. This is about being intentional with what you choose to accomplish during your meeting. And it is that sense. Remember, I was talking about the orderly conversation and how important structure is. Structure is what makes you look intentional. Structure in a meeting, or structure in a presentation, is what makes you look like, oh, you've got this and you are ready to go. So what does it look like? You're framing conversations to ensure relevance to the group. and that's relevance to the group at this point in time. Using purposeful stories to help others understand the why behind the initiative or a decision. Again, stories are coming up. Facilitating discussions well, knowing how far to let them go, knowing when to pull them back, confirming mutual understanding, just making sure that people are with you at every step of the way. So it's very easy. If you when you're thinking again about the orderly conversation, if your tendency is to really rely on the conversation, to really want to get that conversation going because that's where your strength is. You love the interaction with folks. You might lose some of the structure and might therefore lose a little bit of your intentionality. So again, it's about knowing yourself, what your habits are, and managing them. Let's look at, oh, and of course, clear communication is the key there. If we look at inclusiveness, actively involving others, welcoming diverse points of view, encouraging ownership in the mission, empowering initiative. This is about making sure that the process of doing the work involves everyone, and everyone understands their job in it and knows that you see them as important. So what does that look like in the meeting? Make sure the right people are in the room. Give everyone an opportunity to speak. Not as easy as it sounds sometimes. Again, listening well, showing curiosity, asking good questions, delegating tasks. So this is about working with others, making sure that they are feeling part of it, and making sure that you are doing everything you can to get everybody in that conversation. Because if you go into it with the assumption that I need everybody in the room, because if I don't, to get the job done, and if you don't need them, don't have them in the room. You know what I mean? Like don't invite people to a meeting where they're not going to be an important part of it. Their viewpoint isn't necessary. But make sure that once you get people there, that you are really bringing them into the process and making them feel like they're part of the process. Again, empathy comes in here as well. I'm going to turn this back to you, Greg, so you can talk about our 360s.
The 360 assessment isn't necessary to understanding executive presence, but in order for us to become certified in the Bates material, we had to go through that process. And if you've ever been through a 360, you know how perhaps scary that can be and a little bit exhilarating even. So what I'm going to show you is the result of my 360. There are 3 items where which will be in green. Those were the things I was rated high in, and then 3 items will be selected in red, and those were what I scored low in. So this is what's called my my constellation. So I scored high on authenticity, integrity, and appearance. Given Turpin Communications brand, given what we do, I was very happy with that. The things I scored lowest on, though, restraint, composure, and assertiveness, were a bit of a head scratcher for me. So luckily, I had my coach who was asking a lot of questions, and it came down to the idea, and believe it or not, I'm 50 some years into this and did not know this about myself. So talk about self-awareness, is that I am a very fast thinker and a fast decision maker. So in meetings, the decision is made, I'm ready to move on. I'm a busy guy, but other people are slower at making decisions than I am and want to ruminate. That makes me appear impatient. Now, I don't mean that, of course, but that was the result. That was the perception that I was having. So I scored low on restraint and composure. So my intentions as a leader were not matching others' perceptions of me. So the question then is, how can I flex my style to improve relationships and business outcomes? And the answer is very simple. Work on being more patient and letting others have their say. That is actionable advice that I can and do take to let others have their say, and so that I appear less impatient. Now let's take a look at assertiveness. I said to my coach, I'm the most assertive person I know. And he said, aha. Every single one of these facets can have what's called an overstrength. So when you hit the layer of overstrength, it becomes a negative. So if you match up my impatience in meetings with the fact that I'm very assertive, you can see that I can be kind of a jerk at times, of course, unintentional, but that is how others were perceiving me. So I've now grown my self-awareness around that. However, we have to put this in business context. So how much you choose to flex on any of these can be different based on your role and what you're trying to achieve. So when we got certified, this is a couple of years ago, Turpin Communication was doing really well. We were not in crisis whatsoever. So assertiveness was a negative for me. However, in March, Friday the 13th, 2020, that my assertiveness became an important part of my leadership brand, because I was able to lean into my assertiveness and figure out how to rescue the company that was going, having the best year on record to having the worst year on record overnight. That was a scary time. So I can lean into the assertiveness to turn the company around. And we were able to do that in a matter of 2 weeks. That's kind of cool that I was able to understand what I was doing during that period of time. Now, to be clear, I didn't do that on my own. It was a team effort, but I led that team effort. And we are changing things around again, because our clients are now asking us to be face to face. So it's going to take a little bit of assertiveness to rejigger the marketing and all of that. Now, Dale, let's show them your constellation.
Okay, sure. Just like Greg's, the strengths are circled or in green: appearance, integrity, concern. I think we share appearance and integrity, I think.
Yep.
Yep. And then the red: confidence, vision, and assertiveness. I mentioned vision is coming up in this 360, and so here it is. Let me just say this: assertiveness is not an overstrength for me. It is an understrength, or weakness, I guess you could call it. And I was not surprised by the assessment. Greg was surprised by his, and I was not, because I knew that I was slow at decision making. I want to think about every possible alternative. I want to commit analysis paralysis. When I've done other types of assessments, I've come up as an analytic, someone who's not so much interested maybe in other people as he is interested in making sure that I'm thinking through things well enough. So that for me led to the impression for the people during the 360 that I was lacking assertiveness, which then affected the impression I was making in terms of confidence and vision. Because it's not that I lack confidence. In fact, sometimes I think I have too much confidence, but that doesn't mean that I'm a fast decision maker. But the fact that I was slow, the fact that I wasn't assertive enough in meetings or just interactions, wasn't quick to point out what I believe, made it appear that I was low in confidence, and also low in vision, because I wasn't articulating it. I might have a vision in my head, but if you don't articulate it, you're not communicating vision. So for me, it was a very different sort of development from Greg, because my coach said, speak up faster than you want to. Let them know what you're thinking, even if you haven't made a decision. Let them know what you're thinking. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. And when Greg talks about, you can imagine what it's like at Turpin when Greg is Mr. Go Fast and I'm Mr. Whoa, hold on, let me just think about this for another 2 weeks. You can see the kind of tension that occurs in the meetings. I think, as Greg said, just knowing that that's our habit doesn't mean it's stopped, but it helps us understand what's going on when it happens, and then you can make maybe small adjustments, but ones that would still be helpful.
Yeah, and I would say another layer of that, Dale, is that you might notice that both of us have no strengths in substance. Several of the weaknesses were in the middle piece, the substance piece, which is the business acumen piece. And it makes so much sense now why over the years we have relied on external consultants to help us with marketing, with strategic thinking, with the stuff that runs the business, actually. So we can actually understand why that is now and lean into that. We're not good at those sort of things, so help give other people that responsibility.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned earlier, Greg, that you were an actor, and my former life was as an academic, which makes perfect sense given the fact that I'm an analytic. I love to think about this stuff. I just am slow to make a decision. And so it really is interesting that all of our weaknesses, there are no strengths in the substance category.
Yep. Okay, you might be wondering right now, gee, am I low on a particular facet? Well, the handout that I teased earlier is, it's going to give you all the information you need to start to figure that out. It defines each of the facets, even the ones that we did not go through today. And then it talks about what does it feel like for with an overstrength. And most importantly, though, what does this look like in meetings? What can you actively do to lean into this as a strength or to make up for it as a weakness? We also layer in storytelling. We layer in crisis communication because, hello, we've been through 15 months of nothing but crisis. And that's not going to stop just because we go back into face-to-face, because again, that whole hybrid thing. So we encourage you to download the handout. Now, we will be asking for your email address. Don't let that deter you. We already have your email address, so don't worry about that. Okay, now with the foundation of leadership, the guiding principles of leadership communication, now executive presence, let's get boots on the ground and give you some tools and techniques. So communicating intentionally, you must be engaged and in the moment. There's that word intentional again, right? And we are engaged in this moment together. And we do that to make a human connection with people, to get our brains untangled, to focus on achieving the goal, and to think and observe so that we can adapt. And we might be adapting to preferences and habits or the needs of others, but we must be engaged. Now, there is the second handout here, tool number 2, is called the ground rules for effective meetings. We're not going to go into a lot of detail, but what I do want to call your attention to is that everybody in a meeting, both facilitator and attendees, have a shared commitment to getting the work of the meeting done, right? So positive meeting culture requires full participation from both groups. Now, this may seem like just stating the obvious, but have you ever taken a class on how to attend somebody's meetings? No. Have you noticed other people not participating fully? Yes. There's a problem there, right? We need to be taught how to attend other people's meetings. So this is our attempt to do that. And there are recommendations working all the way through at each step of the way. And I want to call your attention to being intentional with the plan. So on the left-hand side, we have the facilitator who is making an agreement to solidify the plan and set expectations and get the appropriate attendees in the room. And if you do that, attendees of the meeting are more likely to participate with you. So being intentional is super important. So here is our third tool we're going to give you access to. It's called the frame the conversation, or in other words, formalizing the meeting. So we had talked just a smidge earlier about that informal chit chat that happens as you enter a conference room. That same thing should be happening in the virtual space. You should be welcoming people into the virtual space and asking how their day is going, what's going on with them. And that's not about prying into their personal lives. It's about showing genuine interest, authentic interest in them. And that helps you build those relationships. But at some point, the meeting has got to be called to order. It has to be formalized. So this tool right here helps us do that with giving you a strategy for the introduction of the meeting or the presentation. And when you do frame a conversation up, you are giving direction, purpose, context, and giving people a reason to participate. If you've ever been in a meeting and you didn't know what you were trying to accomplish, why you were invited, or just what we're trying to do here, it's because the leader of that meeting did not frame the meeting appropriately. Also, always assume that people are distracted. It's even worse in the virtual space, as I know you know, but if you just make the assumption they're going to be distracted, so I have to be intentional about how I formalize things, it'll help you be on your toes. So here we have what looks like just 4 sticky notes. Audience's current situation, goal, agenda, and benefits to them. So let's say that the 18 of us that are here in this meeting right here are at a staff meeting, and it's my job to frame the staff meeting. Hey, everybody, I want to recognize that there's a lot going on as always, and we're here for our weekly staff meeting. So our goal is to get everybody on the same page. So we're going to do a round robin update. The difference is that I'm going to call on you individually so that we can avoid that talking over thing that happens. And then I need to roll out a hybrid office policy that just came down from up above. The reason we're doing this is while we go back into hybrid, we have to keep the momentum going. So right there, took me about 30, maybe 40 seconds. I provided you with a sense of direction, purpose, context, and I gave you a reason to participate in the conversation. Now, here is another example. Let's just say that we are all in the C-suite. So congratulations, promotions all around. but I'm the CEO, and I have this meeting, this brainstorming session that I want to have with each of you. It's the post-COVID strategy meeting with all of you. So I might open that conversation by saying, hey, everybody, our hair's on fire. There's a lot of unknowns, some fears, there's market instability. So I wanted to bring us all together to work together to create our what's next plan. So we're going to review the financials. We're going to talk through some emerging market trends, which some are going to be quite interesting. We're going to do yet another SWOT analysis, and then we're going to work together on a communication plan. The reason we're going to do this is because, as we know, we need to stabilize the business, and we need to reassure the employees, customers, and investors that we've got this. So their stakes are high. Everyone's hair is on fire, but I'm able to get you focused. So this tool helps us do that. Here's another example. Frank, my eyes just landed on your name on the video thing. Let's say, Frank, that you and I work with someone named Tom, and we just received an emotional email from him. I might pick up the old-fashioned phone, Frank, and say, hey, you got a minute? This is about that emotional email from Tom. I'd like to talk some things through and help him, figure out how to calm down. So let's talk through some ideas, and then let's craft a response to his email. The reason I would like to do this with you is because you and I both know we need to avoid a fire with his team and restore confidence that we've all got this. So Frank, regardless of what was going on in your head at that moment when you picked up the phone, I was able to get you focused on this conversation. So this tool is super flexible. It can be used in a variety of situations. I remember a time, Dale, this was when we were publishing The Orderly Conversation, and we had just gotten the manuscript back from the editor. One important thing you should know about The Orderly Conversation is that Dale and I keep our voices separate, very much like this webinar, right? He talks about a certain set of things, I talk about a certain set of things. And our editor didn't like that very much. And so she wrote me out of the book. That was a problem. There was a big problem. You don't do that, right? And so I remember that day very specifically. We were stomping and kicking everything that we could find in the conference room because we were going to have a conversation with the editor, I'm sorry, the publisher, and we were going to tell the publisher, this is not okay, you need to fire her. And Dale threw me under the bus and said, you're going to do this. So I was like, okay, fine. I whipped out the sticky notes and I started jotting things down. And what could have been a very, very bad conversation with the publisher turned into a productive conversation where the publisher said, fine, she's fired. We'll have a new editor working on your book later this afternoon. So I bring this up because this tool is super flexible, and it's the most popular tool that we share with our clients and people like you, by far the most popular. And again, you'll get access to it after today's webinar. One of our class participants many months ago said, good leaders frame every conversation. And I thought, you are right. Good leaders do frame every conversation. They might not realize that they're doing it, but they do. So this tool allows you to be intentional about it. So when you do frame a conversation, it establishes you as the leader, and it's your promise of relevance and efficiency. So this is what that tool looks like that you will have access to after you receive the email later today. Finally, let's get to professional branding in the virtual world. And I'm going to take a glass of water because I got a frog in my throat all of a sudden. So I'm going to ask this question. You can put this into chat. Name someone who has a strong brand in the business world. Make it a person. You can drop that into chat. Tanya says Elon Musk. Stacey Abrams, that's an interesting. Bezos. Kristen says Oprah. Well, let's start with Elon Musk. So Tanya, you were the one who said Elon Musk. What is it about him that makes you take notice? What are the attributes he has?
Honestly, I don't really know anything about him. I just know he's on every headline every time I pull up any kind of news feed for many of my sources. So
He's
it
visible.
seems like he's very visible. Yes.
Yeah. Does anybody have any thoughts how you might describe him? He comes up quite often when we ask this question.
Genius.
Genius. Is that, oh, that's Kristen put it in the
That's
chat.
Kristen, yeah.
Rough around the edges, we have heard. It was interesting. He came. I was going to say came out. I don't mean that in the sexuality way. I mean, he admitted when he was on Saturday Night Live that he has Asperger's, and can be his rough around the edges can be attributed to that, perhaps. But what was interesting is whether he did it on purpose or not, he actually lied to the public that night when he was talking about the Asperger's. It was a very, very strange thing. I'm not really sure what was up with that. Priscilla just added eccentric. Yeah, I would agree with that. He also is very smiley, right? You always see him with that smile, or maybe smirk might be a more accurate way of describing him. Sam adds problematic. Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Stacey Abrams. Ben, you brought Stacey up, the political figure in Georgia. What is it about her that makes you sit up and take notice?
I find her to be incredibly self-possessed and composed in the face of a lot of heat. I think she grounds everything she says in strong values and convictions and a vision of the world, but she's also incredibly substantive in terms of citing facts. And I think she's a very narrative speaker. And she tells a lot of like stories that she tells a lot of stories, but they end in larger points. And I think she like, but even when she's not telling a story, it feels like she's telling like a grand narrative of like what something is, what is happening, why it's a problem.
Yeah,
you need to do about it. I think she ends in a lot of action statements. She's very like I feel galvanized by a lot of her speeches, like moved to action.
Okay, we have two very different brands that we just talked about. So Elon Musk, we had some terms like visible, genius, rough around the edges, eccentric. That is a particular brand. He is intentional about that. You can be absolutely sure he is intentional about how he comes across. So is Stacey Abrams. We have composed, grounded, strong values, a visionary, substantive, fact-based. I can't read my writing on that one. A storyteller, galvanizing. That is a very different brand. Remember, we talked about how each of us is a jewel, and we can lean into our strengths and weaknesses, and each one of us is a unique jewel. And you can be sure that Stacey and Elon Musk are very, very different people, and yet strong brands. So a lot of times Oprah comes up, and we had Kristen add Oprah today as well. Oprah's an interesting one because given what Dale and I do, we often get to speak at conferences, as you can imagine, and we were in the same room with Oprah along with 14,000 other people one time, and her authenticity is so powerful, and her vulnerability, because she was telling a story about her school in South Africa. I won't get into the details, but there was something really, 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 really bad that happened, and it could have taken her brand down, but she was so intentional about how she got in front of it, and then so authentic and vulnerable when she told us the story. It was really, really amazing. So our professional brand sets us apart from others. It communicates something about who we are, and being intentional is important. We've talked about that many times. So we asked you earlier how you would like to be described by the people you work with and for. That seed of starting to develop your professional brand is now growing, right? Because we have some self-awareness, and now you can lean into different skills, insights, talents that you have to make sure that you meet those goals. And what you say, how you say it, and the actions you take or don't make or break your brand. So let's talk about breaking your brand. And Martha Stewart, she had an incredibly specific, solid brand, and she gummed it up big time, and she landed in jail. And when people talk in this webinar about her, they start to question whether she really was as authentic as we were led to believe, because it broke. Ellen DeGeneres is falling into that bucket right now too, because there's some pretty damning stories about how the Ellen that we know on TV is not the Ellen that's backstage. And so if that brand isn't authentic, that's what can happen. Now, going back to Martha Stewart, she has successfully rebuilt her brand, but it's different than it used to be. So self-awareness is critical, and so is engagement. So let's talk about, what do we mean by being engaged? When we are engaged, as you can see here on the slide, this guy is able to think on our feet, right? We are externally focused. Those arrows are going externally toward the people that this guy is talking to. So when we are engaged, we are here and now. We're in this moment together. We're self-aware and in control, and we can rely on our instincts. We feel comfortable, and we know instinctively what to do and say, just as in everyday conversation. But this is super hard work. It's very difficult in the virtual space. So let's figure out, what did we used to do to get ourselves engaged, and what can we replicate in the virtual space? Well, you have two primary engagement skills. They're pausing and breathing to think. An idea formulates, the words tumble out of your mouth. That happens naturally. And we also connect with people through eye contact, to really connect and observe. As I said earlier, we might notice that somebody has something to say, and so we make space for it. The problem is that eye contact isn't mutual in the virtual space. I can't see you. I'm looking into the lens of a camera. I want you to feel as if I'm connecting with you, but the reality is that I can't connect with you. And so, Prasad, you're smiling and nodding. Thank you. That makes me feel really good, but I know for you right now, it looks weird because I'm staring off over here rather than here. So we have to figure out, how do we connect with people, but still be able to read body language? It's a challenge. And if it's such a challenge, why do we recommend video? Well, because it's one of the ways we have to connect with people. And that's not going away. So we need to figure out how to do it well. So engaging the camera, there are some best practices here. Look into the camera when speaking and listening. Hard to do, but that's what you need to do. Check in to observe others' videos from time to time. So it's as if I am driving. I'm looking out the windshield right now, but from time to time, I need to check my mirrors, and that's what I'm doing right now. Ah, Prasad, you're smiling. Yes, good, we're safe, we're good. Kristen, you're smiling. Good, we're good. But now I need to make sure that we're safe on the road, keeping the metaphor going, and I look back out the windshield. So most of my time needs to be here because perceptions matter, but I do need to check in from time to time. Nod your head when you are listening. This is super important. You do it naturally. Everybody does it naturally, but it doesn't come naturally perhaps in the virtual space. So when you're listening, looking into the camera, make sure you're nodding, and that assures people that you are actually hearing. And be a role model for others. As the leader that you are, people will emulate what you do. So be the role model that they want you to be. And that means we focus on how we're being perceived, not how it feels. And remember, executive presence is all about how we're being perceived. So this is not disingenuous here at all, right? I think about it as showing care, showing concern for people. I want them to feel comfortable in the same way that we would if we were face-to-face. Which means you have to work as hard as you do face-to-face, but be intentional about it. So that boils down to vocal energy, facial expression, posture, and gestures. And Dale, you have a sort of an interesting take on this. So why don't you share with everybody, give them a relief of listening to my voice for just a moment.
Okay, the fact that I needed to increase focal energy, facial expression, posture, to be more aware of and clean up those things in a virtual setting was an important lesson for me to learn, because I really don't like being on video. And so that bugged me for weeks into the pandemic, until finally I realized, you know what, just treat this like you're talking to these people face to face. You're very comfortable in that sort of environment, so make this feel like that, and you'll make friends with the camera. And so that's what I did. I think it's really important to understand what level you need to come in to really communicate in what it would be a natural way, face to face, in this unnatural sort of medium. So I think, just for me, the key was crank up the energy, push the volume, push the gestures, push the enthusiasm, all of it. And then you're going to be more comfortable here.
And I think that my journey through that was much faster and easier because of my theater background.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because I took classes on how to deal with cameras. So. Yeah. So think of this as your virtual presence, and you are a broadcaster now. We're going to give you access to some articles that have been written about this. One of them is I think it's a Forbes article, where they talk about being a broadcaster as a leader. Okay, we've been talking about being engaged. We also have to be engaging. So being engaged is about being in the moment and able to think on your feet, as we've already said. Being engaging is about being interesting so that people will want to listen to you. So figuring out, what do I need to do to bring my best self? Remember, find your focus, be yourself, only better, in the virtual space. Of course, we can't ignore the technical stuff. So this image right here is actually what I'm looking at right now. I have an HD camera on a tripod, and I have got a ring light, putting light on my face. And then, as I've mentioned, I have a second monitor where I put all of you. That's what allows me to look my best and function best in the virtual space. Now, when it comes to camera placement, rule of thirds, and most of you are getting this absolutely right. Your eyes are in the upper third. If you need to adjust the height of the camera or the angle to get your eyes up there, we would recommend you doing that. Prasad, I mentioned earlier that we were just seeing the top of your forehead. That's just a simple adjustment, right, with the camera height and angle. Lighting, it's easy. More light in front than in back. And then sound quality. There are some things you need to consider here. There's the headset or earbuds to hear. We use noise canceling earphones because, as I'm sure you have experienced, when there's all that extra noise, it is really grating. Use an external microphone to be heard. You probably have noticed that some people sound as if they're yelling, or they're yelling through a long hallway or something. That's because they're using the cheap microphone that is embedded in their laptop. So if you use a headset that has a microphone, you're going to sound better. And everybody wants to work with people that don't grate their nerves because of the sound quality. And then in terms of the connection, choose the highest quality you've got. I used to say that a landline was the best option. Not true anymore. And who has a landline anyway? Now, virtual backgrounds. You can see this person right here. She is trying out 4 separate virtual backgrounds, and they all look great. And they say something slightly different about her brand. If you choose to use virtual, you do know, I'm sure, though, that it can be well, it can go wrong, right? We've all seen the videos of the woman who turned herself into a potato, and then the lawyer who turned himself into a cat, and then the weird stuff that happens. So green screens are very, very helpful. But if you don't want to go to the bother of having a green screen, it's about contrast. What's behind you should be a different color than what your face, hair, and skin are. Here you can see we've got 4 individuals getting it absolutely right. Jessica is probably the leader of this particular conversation at the moment because she's looking into the camera. So we asked you earlier how you would like to be described by the people you work with and for. I hope today we've been able to lay out some new insights, some skills, techniques, tools that you can use to be intentional about how you work toward meeting those goals. Now, Dale talked earlier about the skill development process. You start with awareness. That's where we are today, right? With the executive presence. We're just making you aware of some stuff. And then you start to assess, how am I doing? And that grows your awareness. And then you assess more. Eventually, you get into the development of really being able to rely and develop those muscles, those skills, and those techniques. And keep in mind, we're all works in progress, right? This never ends. You don't just all of a sudden get to development and ta-da, here you are. You're always working your way through this process. Okay, time for those resources we've been talking about. Kevin is going to drop some links into chat. Take the next couple of minutes to grab what you want. There are the links to the books we talked about today, and then some blogs and articles. So you can multitask at this point by going and getting those items while I finish up our webinar today. Kristen mentioned that she had attended another one of our webinars, and I mentioned that we've got it tomorrow. It's called Virtual Meetings at Work for Everyone, Inclusive Business Communication from a Distance. So we're going to take a look at some of the same stuff we looked at today. So there's some overlap, but we're going to take a deep dive into how can we make sure that our communications, whether we're leaders or not, we've got a diverse set of people in the room. It's equitable once they get there, and we are showing inclusiveness while they're there. I was trying to go through the letters, and I got hung up on inclusivity. Okay, so spread the word. We're doing this. Tomorrow, Virtual Meetings at Work for Everyone is at 10 a.m. Central, and we also have two scheduled on the week July there. You can see the 21st and the 22nd. So if you enjoyed today, share, spread the word, let people know. We're going to be doing this while the need is still there. And if the need is there for bringing us into your workspace to help with an entire team, we're happy to do that as well. And you can see we've got our contact information there. I see that Kevin also just dropped into chat that the tools will be included in the follow-up email that we'll send you, including the executive presence handout, the framing strategy, and the ground rules for effective meetings. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. I can invite you to link with us on LinkedIn. And also, let's see, it is 11:27 here in Chicago in the Central Time Zone in the United States. Here's your final best practice. End early. Give people a chance to go to the bathroom, to go to the refrigerator, right? Now, with that said, you are welcome to take off. However, if there are things that you wish we would have talked about that we didn't, or you have a question, feel free to stick around and we will discuss. I always enjoy those post-webinar conversations with people. So Dale, do you have anything to add to that?
Just thanks a lot, everybody.
It was a real pleasure having all of you.